Have you ever stood in front of a mirror, not just to fix your hair or adjust your appearance, but to really look into your own eyes? To pause and silently ask, who am I beneath all this? Not just the name, not the roles, not the voice in your head that narrates your day, but the presence behind all of that. It's an unsettling feeling, isn't it? Like trying to catch your own reflection before it notices you watching. For many of us, this moment of quiet self-confrontation feels foreign, even uncomfortable. We live in a world that rarely gives us the time or the permission to stop and look inward. We're constantly building an identity, constructing a personality, fine-tuning the version of ourselves we present to others, and in the process we often lose sight of something more fundamental. This is not just a modern problem, it's a human one. Across cultures and centuries, the greatest thinkers have circled back to the same question time and again. Who are we, really? And perhaps more urgently, why do we so often feel like we don't know? Modern life tells us that we are what we do, that our careers, our relationships, our achievements, even the things we buy are what define us. And so we build identities like castles of sand. We tell ourselves stories, some empowering, some limiting, but all fragile. Because what happens when the job is lost? When the relationship ends? When the applause fades? Suddenly, that story collapses. And we're left staring into a kind of inner silence, a void that many try to avoid. This void is where the questions live. The kind of questions that can't be answered with a resume or an Instagram bio. They whisper in moments of exhaustion when the mask slips. They haunt us after failure or in those strange, unguarded seconds when we feel like imposters in our own lives. Imposter syndrome isn't just a psychological quirk, it's a symptom of a deeper confusion. A disconnect between the story we're performing and the silent observer within who isn't quite convinced. And this brings us to a paradox. The more we try to perfect the image of who we think we're supposed to be, the more we drift from who we truly are. Imagine the mind as a mirror, a perfectly still, clear mirror, capable of reflecting the world as it is without distortion. In its natural state, it doesn't judge, it doesn't cling, it simply witnesses. But over time, this mirror becomes fogged, coated in dust, covered with fingerprints, smudges, scratches. Every experience leaves a mark. Every label we accept, smart, broken, successful, failure, etches itself onto the surface. And eventually, we no longer see through the mirror. We only see what's been stuck onto it. What we call the self becomes not a clear reflection, but a collage of conditioning, fear, memory, and aspiration. We identify with the dust. And here's the strange thing. When we forget the mirror is there, we begin to believe we are the dust. But just because we feel anxious doesn't mean we are anxiety. Just because we think I'm not good enough doesn't make it true. The mirror of the mind, when polished, when quieted, reveals something profound, a kind of inner awareness that doesn't come and go with mood or success. It's simply there, watching, noticing. Have you ever had a moment where you caught yourself in the act of thinking? A tiny second of realization that you are not your thoughts, but the one who sees them come and go? That's the mirror. And it's always been there, silent, patient, untouched by the noise it reflects. The modern self is a mosaic of fragments. We play roles, wear masks, shift our personality based on the setting, and often this flexibility is praised. It helps us navigate the social world. But what happens when we begin to forget which, if any, of these roles is real? This fragmentation leads to something subtle but deeply painful, a chronic sense of disconnection from ourselves, from others, from life itself. We find ourselves scrolling endlessly, searching for something that feels like us, but rarely finding it. We take quizzes to find our personality type, follow trends to find a tribe, repeat affirmations to convince ourselves of a story we're not sure we believe. This is not because we are weak or broken. It's because the culture we live in has trained us to look outward for a sense of self, when the real answer has always been inward. not in a selfish way, but in a quiet, courageous way. The kind of inward that dares to look beneath the surface noise and ask, what remains if I let go of every label, every identity, every story I've told myself? That question isn't a dead end, it's a doorway. The mind, when observed carefully, is like a sky full of weather. Thoughts come and go like clouds. Some are light and passing, others are stormy, charged, dramatic, but none of them last forever. The problem is, we tend to forget we are the sky, not the storm. And so we identify with each passing cloud. I am angry, I am sad, I am a failure. And in doing so, we shrink our awareness down to a single emotion or moment, ignoring the vastness that holds it all. This is where ancient wisdom, timeless and cross-cultural, offers a radical insight. The true self is not the content of consciousness. It is the context, the field in which everything happens. The awareness that notices the thought is not the thought. This understanding doesn't require belief. It simply asks for observation. Try this. Sit quietly for a few moments and watch your thoughts arise. Don't follow them, don't judge them, just observe. Soon you'll notice something. There's a gap between the thought and the one who sees it. That gap is freedom. And the more you rest in that gap, the more you'll begin to feel a subtle presence, a sense of self that is not defined by opinion or history. It's quiet, grounded, unshakable. This self doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't panic when life changes, because it was never the story to begin with. It is the mirror, clear, untouched, aware. One of the greatest fears we face when beginning to explore this deeper self is the fear of letting go. Letting go of the story, the identity, the image we've worked so hard to build. It's terrifying because that story has been our anchor, even if it's a painful one. Better to be someone we don't like than no one at all, right? But what if this fear is a misunderstanding? What if letting go of the false self doesn't leave us empty, but finally reveals the fullness we've always sensed but never quite touched? The fear isn't the problem. The problem is mistaking the fear for a sign to stop, rather than a signal to continue. Because beneath that fear is stillness. And in that stillness, something vast and beautiful waits. Not something new, but something ancient. Something that was there before the first insecurity, before the first expectation, before the first performance. You don't have to become anything. You just have to stop running from what you already are. Have you ever tried to see your reflection in a puddle during a storm? The surface is broken, rippling with every drop, every gust of wind. The image looking back is warped, stretched, shattered, incomplete. This is the state of our minds in modern life. Constant motion, endless input. The storm never seems to stop. Our phones buzz, notifications flash, a steady stream of opinions, updates and comparisons flood our awareness. News, trends, crises, everything urgent, nothing essential. We scroll, swipe, click, not out of need but out of habit. And in that flood, we lose something precious. Silence, stillness, space. It's no wonder we feel disoriented. The mirror of the mind can't reflect clearly when it's constantly being shaken. And yet in the middle of this chaos, we're told to find ourselves. As if identity is just waiting in the next article or personality quiz. But the self isn't found in the noise. It's found in what remains when the noise subsides. Which means the challenge is not discovering who we are. It's learning how to clear space for that discovery to happen. We often hear the phrase, "I'm trying to find myself." It sounds noble, like a personal quest, a pilgrimage of the soul. But hidden in that phrase is a subtle trap. To find something implies it's lost, hidden somewhere outside of us. It sets us up to search in all the wrong places. Jobs, relationships, achievements, labels. We look for confirmation, reflection, validation. And sometimes we think we've found it. For a while, until the job changes, the partner leaves, the goalpost moves. Then the identity shatters, and the search begins again. But what if the self is not something to be found, but something to be remembered? not a distant treasure, but a quiet presence, forgotten beneath the noise. The process of self-awareness, then, isn't about chasing an ideal version of who you should be. It's about noticing the awareness that's already there, quietly watching, waiting to be recognized. It's not a becoming, it's an uncovering. And that changes everything. Think of identity like clothing. We wear different outfits depending on the weather, the occasion, the environment. A suit for work, pajamas at home, uniforms, costumes, fashion, all expressions of context. But imagine forgetting you're wearing clothes. Imagine believing the outfit is you. You'd fear changing it. You'd panic if someone judged it. You'd confuse the fabric with your skin. This is what happens when we mistake identity for the self. We cling to roles, parent, employee, artist, friend, not because they're bad, but because we fear that without them, there's nothing left. But roles are just outfits. Useful, temporary, context-dependent. They can be worn with care, even pride. But they are not who we are. And realizing this doesn't make you less connected to life, it makes you more. It gives you the freedom to shift, to adapt without losing yourself in the process. Because when the clothes come off, when the roles fall away, something remains. And that something is you. Have you ever noticed the voice in your head? The one that narrates your life, comments on your day, worries about the future? It chatters from morning to night, often without pause. But there's a deeper realization waiting for anyone who listens closely. You are not that voice. You are the one hearing it. This realization, though simple, is profound. Because it means that thoughts, even the ones that say I'm not good enough or I don't belong, are not you. They are passing clouds in the sky of awareness. To identify with the voice is to ride every wave of emotion as if it defines you. But to realize you are the listener, that you are the still presence behind the voice, is to return to a deeper truth. You've always been there, watching, quietly, patiently. That's why even when your beliefs change, even when your personality evolves, there's something that still feels like you. That unchanging witness. It has no name, no form. But it knows. It knows when you're lying to yourself. It knows when something feels real. It's not judging or analyzing. It's simply aware. And that awareness is the real mirror. Always reflecting, never holding on. But if the self is not our thoughts, not our roles, not even our inner voice, then what is it? This question unsettles the ego. Because the ego wants control. It thrives on labels, status, identity. It clings to the known, because the unknown feels like death. And so, when we begin to question our identity, not from a place of crisis but curiosity, the ego resists. It tells us we're being reckless, that we'll disappear, that we'll become no one. But that's a misunderstanding. You are not dissolving into nothing. You are returning to everything. You're stepping beyond the narrow prison of identity into a spacious presence that holds all your experiences without being trapped by any of them. This isn't the end of your story. It's the first time you're seeing the page. And in that quiet seeing, something remarkable happens. You begin to live more honestly, more lightly. You stop performing and start being. Because there's nothing left to prove. You already are. This isn't just a philosophical insight to be admired from a distance. It's something that can be practiced, embodied, lived, right in the middle of ordinary life. You can notice it while brushing your teeth, driving, talking with a friend. In any moment you can pause and feel the quiet awareness behind your thoughts. You don't have to force it, just observe. One simple way is this. Before reacting to a situation, pause. Ask, what am I noticing right now? What emotion is here? What thought is arising? Don't try to change it. Just see it. And in that seeing, you'll start to feel something subtle, a space opening around your experience, a breath of clarity in the middle of the storm. This is the mirror being polished. Not through effort, but through awareness. There's a strange thing that happens when we begin to live with deeper self-awareness. We feel both lighter and lonelier, freer, but somehow disoriented. It's like walking out of a dense forest into a wide open plain. There's relief, space to breathe, to move, to be, but there's also vulnerability. No familiar trees to hide behind, no path laid out, just raw openness. That's what happens when we start letting go of the false self, the identity built on performance, approval, and fear. We begin to sense the quiet stillness underneath it all, the observing self, the mirror. But that mirror reflects everything, not just the parts we like. And so we begin to see our conditioning, our patterns, our need to be liked, the small, habitual ways we try to control how others see us. This can be uncomfortable, because once we see clearly, we can no longer pretend. But here's the gift. What feels like disillusionment is actually the beginning of true liberation. When you stop investing energy into pretending, performing, defending, when you let go of the exhausting effort to be something, you start discovering what it means to simply be. And being doesn't need validation. It just is. Let's look at two people having a conversation. One is performing. They're calculating how they sound, measuring the other person's reaction, adjusting their words for effect. There's tension, a subtle fear. They're seeking approval, or at least avoiding rejection. The other is present. They're not thinking about how they're being perceived. They're listening, responding, being. Same conversation, different experience. The performer is lost in the mirror of other people's minds. The present one is grounded in their own. This difference is subtle but profound, and you can feel it. We all can. Presence has a kind of gravity to it, a quiet power. It doesn't seek attention, but it draws it. Why? Because presence is rare. Most people are living in a fog of self-monitoring, driven by the fear of not being enough. And so when someone shows up fully open, grounded, unpretentious, it's disarming, disorienting, even a little intimidating. But it's also magnetic. Because presence is what we're all secretly yearning for, not more validation, more being. And the doorway to that presence is awareness. Let's make this real. Imagine someone insults you, criticizes you, questions your worth. The habitual mind responds instantly. Defensiveness, anger, maybe shame. But if you're watching closely, if the mirror of the mind is polished, you'll notice something curious. There's a split second of awareness before the reaction, a small space, a moment where you see the emotion rise, but you're not in it yet. You're watching. In that moment, you have a choice. You can react, or you can respond from awareness. You can defend your identity. Or you can rest in the realization that your true self needs no defense, because the mirror doesn't fight the reflection, it simply sees. And in that seeing, something shifts. The need to prove disappears. The emotion still moves through you, but you're no longer owned by it. You are the sky, not the storm. This awareness is not a concept to memorize. It's a state to live from. And the more you live from it, the more life begins to change. Not dramatically at first, but subtly, almost imperceptibly. You find yourself reacting less, listening more. You stop chasing validation. You start noticing truth. You become less interested in being right and more interested in being real. Even in conversation, something shifts. You're no longer planning what to say next. You're actually there, listening, connected, curious. This is not about becoming a saint or an enlightened being. It's about becoming honest, present, whole. You're not trying to impress anyone, because what you are doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to be true. Let's not romanticize this journey. It's not always gentle. Letting go of the false self can feel like death. Not because you're losing something real, but because you're losing what you were taught to believe is real. It's painful to realize that your ambition was driven by insecurity, that your kindness was sometimes just a survival strategy, that your personality, so carefully crafted, was built more for acceptance than authenticity. But this pain is not punishment, it's purification. You're not being broken, you're being stripped down to something more honest. And what remains isn't less than what you were. It's more, it's raw, untamed, real. It's the part of you that doesn't perform, doesn't shrink, doesn't pretend. It just lives, with eyes open and a heart undefended. But what about the moments when we can't access that awareness? When the mirror feels foggy again, when fear returns, when old patterns pull us back into identity, performance, ego? That's part of the path too. Awareness is not a switch you flip once. It's a practice, a returning, again and again. You don't have to be perfectly present all the time. You just have to notice when you're not and gently come back. The mind will pull you into stories. That's what it does. It's a storyteller, a dramatist, but the mirror is still there, behind the curtain, waiting. And every time you remember, you're polishing it. You're not failing, you're awakening. So far, we've explored the deep inner workings of the self, the illusion of identity, the presence behind thought, the clarity of the mirror. But how do we carry this awareness into our everyday life? Because life doesn't pause while we reflect. The world keeps spinning. Deadlines still loom, people still interrupt, emotions still arise. And this is where the real transformation happens, not in isolation, but in integration. True self-awareness isn't an escape from daily life. It's a new way of meeting it. It's not about walking away from your job, your relationships, or your responsibilities. It's about showing up to those same moments with a different kind of attention. You're still doing the dishes, but now you're aware of your hands in the water. You're still answering emails, but now you notice the breath, the body, the subtle tension in your jaw. You're still having conversations, but now you're really listening. Not just to the words, but to the space between them. This is not about perfection, it's about presence. About learning to bring the mirror into the market. To polish it, not in silence and solitude only, but in traffic, in chaos, in the heat of everyday moments. Because this is where the self is truly tested, and where it's also revealed. We hear a lot about being authentic these days. It's become a buzzword, a brand, something to perform. But real authenticity has nothing to do with how quirky, raw, or relatable you appear to others. It's not about broadcasting your unfiltered emotions. It's about alignment. It's about whether your actions arise from your true awareness or from fear, habit, and conditioning. Sometimes authenticity looks loud, sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it leads, sometimes it yields. It's not a performance, it's a return. A return to a kind of inner coherence, where your outer life reflects your inner truth. Where your words don't betray your values. Where your decisions aren't dictated by fear of rejection. This kind of authenticity is quiet. It's steady, and it's often invisible to the crowd. But you feel it in your bones. And once you've tasted it, the old performances lose their flavor. It's easy to talk about awareness when we're alone. In silence, it feels spacious, even sublime. But relationships, those are the real crucible. They stir the dust on the mirror. They reveal the unconscious patterns we can hide from in solitude. And yet they are not obstacles to awakening. They are mirrors themselves. Every irritation, every trigger, every argument is a signal, an invitation. When someone makes you angry, it reveals an attachment. When you feel jealous, it reveals a comparison story. When you feel rejected, it reveals an identity that depends on approval. Relationships don't create these wounds, they expose them. And if we meet these moments with awareness instead of defensiveness, something miraculous happens. The mirror gets clearer. We stop blaming the other for what we've not yet resolved within ourselves. We start using relationships not to fill a void, but to reflect truth. We begin to love not as a strategy to feel safe, but as an expression of presence. And that changes everything. Because now you're not just using others to mirror your ego. You're meeting others from the mirror. In a noisy world, stillness can feel like a luxury, a weekend retreat, a quiet moment before bed. But stillness isn't something you visit, it's something you remember. And the more you return to it, the more you realize it was never far away. Stillness is not the absence of thought, it's the space around thought. It's not the opposite of life. It's the background that makes life intelligible, like silence that makes music possible. In fact, some of the most powerful moments of stillness arise in the middle of movement. A single breath before answering a difficult question, a pause before reacting to an insult, a soft awareness that holds grief without collapsing into it. Stillness is the pulse beneath the personality. It is the mirror that doesn't move, no matter how wild the reflections become. And the more we remember it, the less we are tossed by the waves of life. Not because the waves stop, but because we stop believing we are the wave. One of the more subtle traps on the path of self-awareness is turning it into a self-improvement project. We begin with good intentions, to see clearly, to live more truthfully, but somewhere along the way, the ego hijacks the process. It starts keeping score. I meditated 5 days this week. I handled that conflict so mindfully. I'm becoming a better person. And slowly, the quest for truth becomes another performance, another identity. But here's the thing, you are not a project. You are not here to become the perfect version of yourself. You are here to remember what doesn't need fixing, to awaken to what's already whole beneath the dust of conditioning. This doesn't mean you won't grow, evolve, or heal. Of course you will. But it won't be from striving. It will be from seeing. Because what you are cannot be improved, it can only be revealed. In a world obsessed with validation, this is perhaps the hardest truth to live. You don't need to be understood to be whole. You don't need to be seen to be real. The mirror doesn't ask for applause, it just reflects, and so do you. You do not need to explain your inner journey to those who cannot see it. You do not need to convince the world of your value. That's the old self talking, the self built on performance and permission. But the real self? It's quiet, steady, whole. It knows that truth does not need a spotlight, because the light it carries is enough. In moments of deep self-inquiry, something often emerges, a desire to be alone. Not out of resentment, not out of superiority, but because solitude begins to feel sacred. It's where the mirror becomes clearest. But in a culture that equates constant connection with value, solitude is often mistaken for loneliness. We're told that if we're not always available, always visible, always engaging, something must be wrong. But solitude is not the same as isolation. Isolation is the absence of others with an undercurrent of fear, a hiding. Solitude is the presence of yourself with an undercurrent of peace, a homecoming. When you begin to rest in your own awareness, not the voice in your head, not the roles you play, but the silent presence beneath, it becomes easier to be alone. Not because you dislike others, but because you no longer depend on them to reflect who you are. The mirror of the mind doesn't need company to feel complete. It doesn't crave distraction to avoid silence. It simply reflects. And in solitude, that reflection is undisturbed. Ironically, the more at home you become in your own presence, the more open you are to others, because you're no longer using them to fill an emptiness. You're meeting them from fullness. There comes a strange and beautiful point on the inner journey, a point where the question, "Who am I?" no longer produces a clean answer. Not because you're confused, but because the old answers don't fit anymore. You are not your job, not your story, not your pain, not your accomplishments, not even your personality, which turns out to be more fluid than fixed. You feel this deepening, but how do you describe it? You don't. You stop trying, not because it's vague, but because it's vast. Because truth at some point exceeds language. It becomes a lived presence, not a paragraph. You stop needing to declare who you are. You stop needing others to confirm it. The mirror just is, quiet, present, still. And in that stillness, you find something deeper than identity. You find being. The old self was built like a house of cards, carefully arranged, always at risk of collapse. It needed reinforcement, feedback, constant construction. But this deeper self, this mirror, is not a structure. It's a space, a groundless ground, a formless presence. And while that might sound disorienting at first, it's the most stable thing you'll ever know, because it's not about anything. It's not defined by belief, so it doesn't collapse when beliefs change. It's not attached to outcomes, so it doesn't panic when things go wrong. It simply is. And when you begin to live from this place, something remarkable happens. Peace becomes less situational. You're not chasing it. You're not bargaining for it. You're remembering it. Even in sorrow, even in uncertainty, even in heartbreak, you can feel the quiet mirror behind it all. Not in a way that denies the pain, but in a way that holds it without being consumed by it. This is not detachment. It's depth. For all the seeking, all the striving, all the spiritual searching, we often come to the same place we started from. But now we see it differently. The self we were looking for wasn't hiding in a philosophy or an achievement or a version of perfection. It was the one who was watching all along. And perhaps the final realization is this: you never needed to become anything. You only needed to stop believing you were something else. The mirror was never broken, just covered. And now, after all the effort, all the letting go, all the moments of stillness, you see it again, clear, quiet, aware. And in that reflection, you're not looking at someone new. You're looking at what was always there, waiting for you to see it. So, who are you? If your mind rushes to answer, pause. Let the question echo for a moment without rushing to fill it. Because maybe the point isn't to find an answer. Maybe the point is to let the question point you inward again and again until the search becomes silent, until the seeker dissolves into the seeing. And in that seeing, the mirror of the mind becomes not just a tool for reflection, but the very space in which life moves freely, openly, fully. You are not a role, not a mask, not a thought. You are the awareness in which all things arise. You are the mirror. If this reflection touched something within you, something wordless, something quietly true, take it with you. Not as an idea, but as a practice. Practice returning to stillness, to breath, to presence, and most importantly to yourself. Not the version you project, but the awareness that sees it all. You don't need to explain that to anyone. Just live it. Because the world doesn't need another perfect persona. It needs presence. It needs people who are at home in themselves so they can help others find home too. And if you're still not sure who you are, that's okay, because what you are can't be captured. It can only be lived. And when you live from that, gently, honestly, without a mask, you don't just reflect the truth, you become it. If this video resonated with you, I invite you to share your reflections in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment of clarity where you saw through the noise to something quieter inside? And if you're drawn to these kinds of explorations, into self-awareness, philosophy, and timeless wisdom, subscribe to Mind Unwoven. We're just beginning this journey.